On June the 28th, Rick Gray returned home to find his luxury house in flames. His wife Fiona and their 2 children, Terence and Adrian, were safe, but it seemed the fire had been started deliberately. Further investigations have resulted in a charge of arson against his wife, Fiona Gray. Evidence so far presented in the Crown Court would seem to suggest that Mrs. Gray had, on more than one occasion, threatened to burn the family home down. Mr. Gray, who is in the process of divorcing his wife, has just finished saying that life with her was like living with a demanding child who refused to grow up.
Now, I have only a few more questions, Mr. Gray. On the morning of June the 28th, just as you were leaving for work, your wife told you of her affair with Gilbert Brinsley, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Now, how did she tell you this precisely? Proudly? Defiantly?
Well, no, she was rather subdued about it.
Indifferent, then? Ashamed?
No. It's difficult to recall exactly. She was very upset, I remember that.
Crying, you mean?
Well, yes.
More ashamed than anything else?
Possibly, yes.
And you tried to find out the whys and wherefores of the matter, did you?
Sorry?
Well, since your wife had freely confessed to this affair, you were obviously concerned to know what had led her to it.
I didn't ask any questions, if that's what you mean.
Not then or at any other time?
No.
Yet you did consider it extraordinary behaviour, Mr. Gray.
Well, she'd never done anything like it before, to the best of my knowledge.
And she was in tears and asking you to forgive her?
No, she never said anything like that.
Well, a woman doesn't always have to say it, Mr. Gray, only to be know someone understands.
Miss Tate, I've just taken too much over the years. It was just one damned thing after another, and adultery just seemed to me to be, well, to be the last straw.
So on the morning of June the 28th, you simply left Mrs. Gray to the consequences of her remorse, whatever they might be, and you went to work.
Well, I honestly couldn't think...
Is that true, Mr. Gray?
Yes, that's true.
Now, you tell us that when, on that same morning, you told her that you were taking the boys to your mother's house, she protested only by way of making the right noises.
Yes.
So when she protested about you having the custody of the children, you told her she didn't really want them and she was only making the right noises.
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
No re-examination.
You may stand down, Mr. Gray.
I call Gilbert Brinsley.
Gilbert Edward Brinsley, please.
What is your religion?
Church of England.
Take the testament in your right hand and read aloud the words on this card.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
You are Gilbert Edward Brinsley, and you live at 43 Otterton Street, Fulchester.
That's right.
And until August of last year, you were in part-time employment as tutor to an amateur painting group known as the Coldwater Valley Art Society.
I was, yes.
What qualified you for that work exactly?
I'm an art teacher by profession. The Coldwater Society was one of several that I acted as tutor to. I run a session there in the village hall on Thursday mornings.
Mr. Brinsley, why did you terminate this employment? It is over, I believe.
Yes, there was an embarrassment that I was involved in. I thought it best for all concerned if I resigned.
I see.
Now, can you tell us something of the composition of the Coldwater Valley Art Society? What kind of people attended it? How many?
It was an ad hoc group, like most of these things. The ladies of the village, one old gentleman. I had a hard core of 15 members. Other people dropped in from time to time as the fancy took them. It was fairly informal.
Do you know the accused, Fiona Gray?
Yes, I do. Mrs. Gray was one of my regular pupils. She'd been attending the sessions from December onwards. She'd been introduced by another society member, Mrs. Helder.
Were you associated with the accused in a rather more intimate way than this, Mr. Brinsley?
You must answer, you know, Mr. Brinsley. We can't avoid this issue.
But I object, my lord. I didn't want to come here. I don't see this has anything to do with
Brinsley.
me. I don't think I should be asked questions like this.
Mr. Brinsley, this is a court of law and you are here to give evidence. Now, counsel has asked, were you associated with the accused in a rather more intimate way than you have yet indicated? Please answer that question.
From April to June last, Fiona Gray and I were lovers, to coin a phrase.
What does to coin a phrase mean?
Well, it wasn't exactly a grand tempestuous affair, you know. On the contrary, it was very tentative, very foolish. It was just at the time I was as lonely as Mrs. Gray was desperate.
As lonely as she was desperate. Perhaps you'd better tell us about it in detail.
Well, it began with my pointing out that her line drawings were rather weak. She agreed that they were. She asked if I'd give her some individual tuition. So I told her to wait behind for half an hour after the session. Well, there was a tenseness about her that I found attractive. It seems that she and her husband were in difficulties. They didn't get on. It got on her mind.
Got on her mind, Mr. Brinsley?
Yes, it aggravated her, irritated her. She seemed to want to get back at her husband.
Did she say that to you, that she wanted to get back at her husband?
Yes, from time to time.
Through an affair with you?
Yes, I suppose that's what it came down to. Look, I'm bound to say, though, that from the beginning it was more her idea than mine. If it had been left to me, I don't think I would have followed my inclinations. Look, I don't consider myself a promiscuous sort of person. It's just that I've never been one to form lasting relationships. You see, for most of my adult life, I've had to cope with an invalid mother. So it's meant that marriage has been out of the question. So I've responded to the situation as it presented itself.
In any event, Mrs. Gray provided you with the encouragement to have an affair with her.
Yes.
Now, was there anything else that happened during the course of your relationship that persuaded you that Mrs. Gray was anxious to use you to injure her husband?
Well, you can't always be certain of such things. Fiona was a very tense and anxious woman. She didn't always say what she thought.
Please, Mr. Brinsley, was there anything else?
Again, I must insist that you answer, Mr. Brinsley. You know, really you gain nothing at all by hesitating in this deliberately bashful manner.
It isn't bashfulness, my lord. One day in June, when we were alone together, Fiona said that she wanted to really hurt her husband. She wanted me to help her. She had a plan. One Sunday, she was going to get her husband and the children out of the house, and I was to set fire to the place. He would come home and find the charred embers.
I see. And how did you respond to this suggestion, Mr. Brinsley?
Naturally, I didn't take it seriously for a minute. I told her not to be so stupid. But then, as we know, a fortnight later, there was a fire.
Now, after the conversation in which you refused to have anything to do with her plan to set fire to the house, did you see Mrs. Gray again?
No.
Did you try to?
Yes, I telephoned her. She said she didn't want anything more to do with me. It was all over.
Thank you, Mr. Brinsley.
Mr. Tate?
Mr. Brinsley, did Mrs. Gray often talk stupidly in your presence?
I beg your pardon?
Well, you've just told us of a pretty alarming suggestion she made to you about her husband's house, but you seem not to have been particularly bothered by it. You merely dismissed it as talking stupidly.
Well, Fiona didn't always think before she spoke.
Well, how then to be certain what she truly meant and what she didn't about anything?
Yes.
Can you swear that when she turned to you for love, it was only to get back at her husband?
Well, she said she wanted to get back at him. I suppose it came down to that.
Your own easy charm had nothing to do with it.
Oh, what sort of a question is that? I don't think that...
Well, wasn't it obvious to you that she was a woman deprived of love, starved of it even, and that was why she turned to you?
Well, there was something of that in it. I don't deny it.
Oh, really, Miss Tate, you must be more particular with your questions. Now, Mr. Brinsley, did she ever say to you that she needed love or affection or anything like that?
Yes, sometimes she did say things like that.
Now, you've told us that when it came to the act of love between you and Mrs. Gray, it was more her idea than yours.
Yes.
Can you amplify that remark, please?
Do you mean give details?
Really, Mr. Brinsley, for a man who can distinguish so well between what it is to be promiscuous and what to respond to a situation, you are remarkably reticent. But I'll put the question in another way. Did you seduce Fiona Gray, or did she seduce you?
Look, it wasn't like that. Look, I've told you, it was very reluctant and shy. You've no right to put it in those terms. Because, as I recall, it began when I touched her hand. I was trying to show her how a line should go. But I knew the moment I touched her hand that that's what she wanted. She was trembling. She looked at me. I just knew.
And this brazened absence of restraint on the part of a married woman was enough to make the whole affair more her idea than yours.
You don't understand. There was
something... Oh, I
something...
think I do understand, Mr. Brinsley. I understand very well. Now, what sort of person did you find Fiona Gray to be in that brief period that you were lovers? Was she a confident person, independent-minded?
No, quite the contrary.
Insecure, then? In need of constant reassurance and encouragement.
Yes, basically.
A child, in fact.
Well...
Just yes or no, Mr. Brinsley?
Well, yes, but let's get one thing straight. Fiona Gray had her own subtle way of controlling a situation. I mean, though she tried very hard to convince you she was all desperately helpless, in a strange way, she was the stronger. I mean, she wanted me to burn her husband's house down. And if I'd been a tiny bit more under a spell, I might even have done it. Look, she could manipulate people. She could bewitch them.
Do you know, Mr. Brinsley, I don't suppose that excuse has been used in a court of law since the 17th century. So now, Fiona Gray is a witch who compelled a virtuous man to her bed by the black arts. You found an insecure, emotionally deprived woman, and you used her for your own purposes, Mr. Brinsley. You did not respond to a situation, but you merely acted selfishly and without principles. It was not a case of her starting an affair and trying to use you, but of you acting as an old-fashioned seducer of an insecure and unstable woman.